Hello, hello.
Hello.
Oh, okay. Hopefully everyone can hear us and we have a crowd out there. Go ahead and put some emojis and say hey in that chat if you are here and you can hear me. That's the most important part. Um, go ahead and put some comments in that session chat as everyone starts to trickle in. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to the first event of our new quarter. We're calling this one Making Hybrid Happen, as I'm sure you know. I hope everyone's having a really great summer so far. I wore my bright pink lipstick and it happens to match Lisa's pink shirt. I was feeling summery and I was like, oh, something with flowers, something pink. But today we're talking about a topic that everyone is buzzing about, and that's hybrid events. What a hybrid event is, how do we get one going, where do we start, how successful is this model, and more questions that I'm sure everyone is waiting to ask. So questions are very much encouraged, everyone, for today's event. You can either click the Q&A tab in the chat panel to submit your questions, or you can click the raise hand button below the stage screen, and we can call you up and you can ask, I'm going to say us your questions, even though I'm deferring to Lisa, who is our expert for today. But yeah, you can ask us your questions that way too, and we'll be a little more interactive and fun that way. So with us, without any further ado, we have Lisa Gregory, owner of Gregory Event Services, with us here today. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for being with us. Go ahead and give everyone a little intro to yourself and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So first off, thank you to you and Goldcast for inviting me. I'm happy to be presenting and talking with everyone today. I see some friendly faces out in the audience, so great to see everybody. My name is Lisa Gregory. I have been in the events industry for 21 years now. I started doing events at the University of Oregon in college, and then I've been in different verticals such as the auto industry, high tech, of course, healthcare, nonprofit, education. So I come from a wide variety of background. I've also worked for startups, major corporate, small business, associations, and agencies. So if you're in the audience, hopefully I can relate to you on some level, and I'm excited to share and answer any questions you might have.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to dive right into just a list of questions that I know I have. So I'm going to start with, what kind of events did you most commonly assist with and put on before there was a pandemic? Let's go way back to the before. What were you doing before everyone sort of went, we need to do virtual events now? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, sure. So I worked primarily in high-tech startups. Companies usually hire me to do user conferences, manage their trade shows, and their internal events like marketing kickoffs or company kickoffs. So that's what I was busy doing. Conferences ranging from about 200 people to 4,000 is my comfort zone. And yeah, that's my comfort zone. I love those, like
4,000, just a cool 4,000 people.
Yeah, no, it's great. And in January, actually, I had forecasted, right before COVID, I had forecasted my most successful year. I had 29 events already contracted in January. And so, of course, the rest of the year remained. And then as soon as COVID hit, I went down to 6. So in March, I went from 29 to 6. So that was an interesting transition for sure.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of, I guess, transitions, talking about virtual events, what was the most surprising thing, aside from like going from like 29 to 6? What was the most surprising thing that you encountered about virtual events, and maybe the setup or the execution of it?
Yeah, there's a few things. One thing that surprised me is the number of companies that just put everything on pause to kind of watch to see what the industry is doing, to sort of figure out, what do we do now? And then there's a bunch of companies that just dove right in. So I obviously was a partner that was just going to dive right in with these companies. But another thing that I didn't anticipate fully was just how long it would take to execute these events. So I always track my time and say, okay, this platform is going to take 10 hours to put together when it would take 20 hours. And, the teams internally just weren't used to actually running that many details. It's kind of like, okay, we get all the speakers and the sponsors and the venue all set up. Then we get to the event and it just sort of happens, right? We have fine-tuned everything to this perfection. In a virtual event, it doesn't work that way. There's way more details. There's way more things technically that could, go wrong that you have to double, triple check. So just the amount of time it takes, and then the learning curve. I've been in the industry for a very long time, and I've worked in scheduling tools, project management tools, and learning all these virtual tools. I've worked in several different platforms, yours, of course. Everything's new. So yay, Gold Cast. So we're kind of working together, right? Like we're strategic partners together, and we're communicating like, oh, we have this bug here, or we really want this feature here. So that was something too that I didn't quite anticipate. It was like, well, we'll go in and everything will just work great. Well, it was new for everybody, right? So there's hiccups. Yeah. So it's that communication line and really working your butt off to communicate. This isn't working right, or I need this feature.
And I'm sure you saw some of those things also coming from a mile away, like the level of expectation of like, well, obviously you're not going to be able to jump into a platform and just be like, oh, great, I'm going to know how this works. Or I'm going to know everything that's happening. And with events, we always say anything that can go wrong will, right? But in person, you can almost like hide it better because you're like, some people may not notice that like something's on fire if I put it out quickly enough. Yeah. Or, you can redirect everyone in a different, but when something happens virtually, it's kind of like there's almost no hiding it. Something like everyone's going to see it because everyone's in the same place trying to do the same thing, and so that's another feature or aspect as well. Like when you were talking about just like the in-person sort of event setup and then a virtual event setup. Oh God, it has a very different execution feel.
Yeah, I think the thing I anticipated was to make sure that the events went off perfectly. That I would need to ask a lot of questions and poke holes in everything, right? So I didn't know what I didn't know. And sometimes the folks running the platforms didn't know what they didn't know because they're not on my side. So it's asking those questions like, hey, what's going to go well? What isn't going to go well? What do I do if this happens? What do I do if this happens? What if I do if this happens? And then having a backup plan for everything. So I pre-record, we load the video. Well, what if the video doesn't load? Okay, then I have to have the video preset and pre-ready so that I can play that video. So there's all sorts of things that I knew could potentially happen. So really just asking those questions, being super inquisitive. And of course, events are always a lot of work, right? So I knew it was going to be a lot of work and a learning curve, but I kind of love that. So yeah, I was excited. I do love virtual events.
I was about to say, like, louder for the people in the back. Events are a lot of work. I'm sure you or any other field and event marketer out there has had the experience where people just think like, oh, you're just putting together like a thing, like whatever. And you're like, no, there's a lot that's going on in the background for this to look good on the front end. Well, the back end is something.
Yeah. One more thing I want to mention is I knew the timelines would be shorter, right? So in-person events, you have to book a venue sometimes a year in advance. You have your budgets approved. When COVID hit, we had no time and we were executing events within weeks, and it's still happening, even though it's been a year later. Like I just produced a 3-track hybrid virtual event with some live sessions and some pre-record in like 4 weeks. So those timelines are still short. And so that's one thing that I knew was going to impact my clients and our team was just things were going to move fast.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, I want to jump right into hybrid events. Lisa, how do you define hybrid events? Because I've heard a lot of different definitions, a lot of different wants and requirements of people trying to do a hybrid, or they'll come like to me and say, okay, what do you do for a hybrid event? And I'm like, oh, geez. There's a, there's a couple different ways I guess you can slice this, because then some people are like, well, that's not hybrid, that's streaming, or that's not whatever, so how do you define hybrid, or or maybe even what are the different ways you've experienced hybrid events? Because I know you were also sort of doing hybrid type of events even before this buzz now. So talk to us about that, how you define it.
So previously, before COVID, we did do hybrid events, right? We did you're running this beautiful main stage and you're live streaming to audience, you're doing all the promotions, you might have special programming that just the audience at home, your global audience is watching, versus the in-person who's getting some other special things that the in-person audience is doing. So it's been around for a long time. The new hybrid that's sort of all the rage is being defined in many different ways. So it's typically running a full-blown virtual conference in a platform such as Goldcast, and then also having a venue that's, at a hotel, and then you're streaming. Some of your speakers are live and in person, and some of your speakers are virtual. So that's what the new traditional hybrid model is. There's also the virtual hybrid model, which I think a lot of people are like, wait, there's a virtual hybrid model? So Goldcast is the perfect platform for that. I did, in the last 5 days, I have done 3 events actually, one that was fully live, one that was hybrid virtual, and one that was hybrid with in-person and an online stream. So the virtual components was amazing on Goldcast. I'm not like a salesperson, but I will just tell you, for the folks that are watching, what we did is we pre-recorded for a global audience. We had, especially in the summer, people that couldn't make the event, right? But we wanted to hear from them. We wanted to hear their background. So we let them pre-record if they were on a time zone that couldn't make the event. It was just East Coast time. We let them pre-record, and anybody really that wanted to pre-record, because, some in every industry, some people thrive in live and some people don't. So we had about 50-50. And then we had the live speakers, and then we had live MCs in every track, 3 tracks. And it was a great event, very well executed on the Goldcast side. So that is another definition of hybrid.
There you go. Straight from the expert. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and push a poll, because I'm interested to see what everybody else is sort of thinking. I want to know if you've started planning a hybrid event. We've got a few different answer options here. Yes, for Q4 of this year, maybe for next year, not yet. Wouldn't even know where to begin, or if hybrid is an actual solution in your mind. I'm going to go ahead and leave that open for a little bit. So go ahead and click that poll tab and drop in select your answer, and I'll revisit in a little bit. But I wanted to just talk about, so one of the reasons that I added the answer option of I don't think it's lucrative is that I've been hearing things in the event atmosphere of like, well, some people think that once we're going to just kind of going to go all the way back around to in-person events. Like it's going to be, we went from virtual, we had like the whole events industry had a little shakeup, went virtual, great. Then we're going to try to adapt it into hybrid, and then we're just going to swing right back into in-person and maybe do the occasional webinar here and there, just as most companies used to in the past. I've heard people say that, well, the virtual component is really lucrative for us globally. So therefore people are saying like, I think once we've now figured out virtual is here to stay. Hybrid is kind of like a, yeah, sure. However you're going to define it. But honestly, we'd rather do virtual. So that was one of the reasons that I wanted to know how people were thinking. I've heard a lot of interesting solutions. Somebody even said something about like, oh, the only industry that does hybrid correctly or to like the best of its ability has a huge budget, and that's like the sporting and entertainment industry, because any show you see show or match or game, whatever you see in person, has a different feel and experience to the people who are watching at home from their TV with a commentator or, whomever. And it's just a different experience. So both audiences are getting their own experience, but all watching the same thing. And I just thought that was really interesting. So that was one of the reasons that I kind of threw that out there, and now I'm like, ooh, hybrid. I'm going to repeat that if anybody else has a question out there that they wanted to ask, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A tab. Or if you want to raise your hand and come on up with us, you're welcome to. There's no solid we're going to have Q&A at the end or anything like that. This is just a free flowing discussion, so everyone's welcome. Anyway, let me go right back into asking you questions about hybrid events.
Sure.
I wanted to know, in your opinion, what the most underrated feature of a hybrid event is, based on your definitions and your experience and everything that you've done. What's something that's really underrated that maybe people should be keeping an ear or eye out for?
Well, I got these questions in advance, I'm just going to say. So I actually took a lot of time to think about this, and I'm going to throw some love.
Way to blow my cover, Lisa.
I'm going to throw some love out to all the event planners on here. So I'm going to say the most underrated feature of a hybrid event is the events team. 100%. The events team, go event planners. So the events team has been through the ringer, right? So a lot of people have been laid off and then rehired or changed jobs, or been, you're in the process of learning, okay, what are virtual events? Now we have to move to hybrid events. What does that mean? What's the recipe for success for both of those? So getting a strong events team behind your back, that is the number one underrated thing. I completely agree, or am saying. And then also for me, as far as
I completely agree.
Okay. And then on the platform side, it's the connection. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, well, of course, the in-person connection is great. I'm a extroverted introvert, so I enjoy my alone time, but I also love people and love interacting with people. So that human connection is very hard to replace with virtual events. However, if you took virtual events away from me, I might cry, because do you know how many connections globally I have made and how much I have learned from this global audience that I might never have connected with if it was an in-person event, because they wouldn't have flown in. So I love both, and I love the idea of hybrid. However, I know it's not for everyone due to budget and time. So, I think that's the most underrated, is just the connection of both, the connection of the being able to do both. And people are like, oh, we're not going to do hybrid, it's too expensive. It's like, well, the in-person connection is important, or we're just going to do virtual. Conversations are happening, but I do think that the connection for both the in-person and global online are very important.
Yeah, and so on that, I spoke with someone who's I'm located in Austin, Texas, and there's someone here who's really big on events. She has her own company. She wrote a book. Her company's called Red Velvet Events, and her name is Cindy Lowe. And she wrote out a little, I guess, like a article or blog post that she had shared, and it was talking about a hybrid sandwich model, where it's sort of the best of both worlds without trying to force one over the other. So pretty much how she was sort of pitching it, and I thought this was really relevant in what you're saying, because the benefits of that in-person, almost the benefits of the in-person and the benefits of the virtual, it's really hard to get them all in one and in one sort of hybrid model and get the actual full-fledged benefits out of both. So the way she sort of proposed it is that, instead of doing a hybrid event, if you span it out over 8 weeks or something, or whatever, and you do like a virtual model, then you do an in-person and focus on it being an in-person event, and then bring it back, record that content and bring it back a couple weeks later and sort of almost repurpose the discussion as sort of a pre-recorded virtual event, and then just have the speakers, come on in, like, the final 20, 30 minutes or something like that, saying, like, okay, based on what you just watched from, our in-person event, what questions do you have that we probably didn't answer, or, and sort of sandwich it as a hybrid model in that sense. And I was like, wow, that's actually, that makes sense if you think about it, because it allows each type of event to have their moment, but yet not let somebody else miss out on something else. Like, there is that option if you want to come in person and have that in-person experience, we can focus on that in-person experience. But then if you're like, I really can't, it's like, hey, no worries, it's going to come back out as a virtual event later. And you'll still get the virtual event benefits catered to you. So that was something that I had heard of, read of, thought it was really interesting. Definitely want to hear your take on that, but I am going to go ahead and publish the results of this poll really quick that we asked some time ago. So it seems like the winner is the fact that people are starting to plan for hybrid events in Q4, especially towards the end of this year. I know, Lisa, you said you were super busy for the rest of this year trying to figure out other types of events and all that as well. And it seems like in a close second is planning for 2022. And we have somebody who's like, I wouldn't know where to begin. And we do have a few people who said, I don't think it's an actual solution, but that in between is not yet, waiting to see what happens, which is fair. I know even with virtual events, a lot of people were like, I'm going to wait and see how everybody else is doing stuff first, maybe see what platforms they're using, see what their format is, and then try to adapt and take notes and say, okay, well, that didn't work for them, so let's not do that. But do you have anything to contribute based on what I said before about that sandwich model, or any of the selections of these answers that people provided?
Yeah, I do love the sandwich model. Absolutely. And the reason why I love it is, so if you do an in-person event, so I've done an in-person event that's 9 tracks, right? There's absolutely no way for an attendee to go to 9 tracks at the same time. And we would always post the content on YouTube or Wistia and have people watch, but the excitement drops, right? You don't have a big, huge other audience of developers or, users that are there having those conversations. So I love the sandwich model. Have your amazing big event. It might not be as many people, so you will, in a way, budget-wise, you won't be spending as much, but then also plan on the virtual model. But it is a bit of a catch-22 for the speakers because it does require more time. So kind of figuring out how we can best utilize those speakers' time, because they are a lot of the time volunteering their time. But then throw a big virtual event that has some unique, twists and turns and offerings that the in-person event didn't have. So you're still doing that global reach. And we can turn those events pretty quick. So in Goldcast, you pre-record everything. We get the edited videos. We edit them. My editor's super duper quick. You get them online. And I mean, you have a hybrid event, like, I don't want to say the next day, but we move very quickly.
I was going to say the next day.
Yeah,
it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. You might want to give your team a little break. They just walked 15 miles and worked 17-hour days for a week. But exactly. But I do love the sandwich model. I think it will become definitely very popular for sure in the upcoming years.
I think it's also because it's less expensive, because when it comes down to doing a hybrid event, and when people think hybrid events, the main thing they think about is like, okay, whatever's in person is going to be streamed online. Like, that's like the main component of like, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to stream it so that people at home can still engage and participate, etc. And then there's like that live feed, and then the making sure everything goes well, and there's a lot of I think added production costs to it, as opposed to just being like, great, we're just going to have a camera set up, we're going to be mic'd up to the speakers are going to get mic'd up, kind of your basic setup, make sure everything is good, it's going to get recorded, and then we're going to edit it and throw it online. So on that note, actually, we do have a question from the audience. Kimber wants to know, what's a reasonable budget and goal split if you're running a hybrid program? Do you have any takes on that budget-wise? That's a really good question, Kimber.
Yeah, so whatever your in-person budget was and whatever your virtual budget was, put those together. That's the start. And then you're going to need to increase that budget by, gosh, I don't know, at least 10 to 25%, I would say, to bring in those extra elements, because your production team is going to then have to be live streaming everything and connecting to the platform. If you do have an external consultant, you're probably going to want to double that budget for that individual, because they'll be running 2 events at the same time. And then what was the other part? What percent of goals can you reasonably expect from the digital? Well, as we've seen in the trends, when virtual events came out at the beginning, people were getting like, and Kimber, I know you experienced this, like 10,000 people registered and like this crazy engagement. I also work with HashiCorp. Their engagement was like crazy amazing. I mean, just out of this world. So now as virtual has been around, we're seeing that digital engagement is going down if you do more and more and more virtual. If you just do a couple virtuals a year, I think you'll see that your attendance will start coming up, but it's all about marketing and content, right? So if you've got amazing content, amazing speakers, and you market your event well, your percent of attendance will go high, your registrations will go high. What we are seeing, or at least what I'm seeing, is that all the content going out and the marketing kind of feels the same. So don't be afraid to be different. Don't be afraid to do guerrilla marketing, make a bit of a splash. The last thing I want to hear is like the same old thing, because that's kind of, we're seeing a repeat. So encourage your team to think outside the box.
Yeah, I love that. I was going to say that even with what the onset of all these virtual events, I feel like everything became really oversaturated out there. Everyone was doing a webinar. Everyone was doing a virtual event. Click here, click there, everything. We'll give you the recording. It's everywhere. Yeah. And I would even be like, wow, with the amount of things going on, it's going to be really hard to try to get those registration numbers because it's oversaturated. Like, you might be talking about a topic that you think is very nuanced or very important to your business model or product or whatever, but guarantee your competitors or there's 5 other people out there having the same discussion at the same time frame that is probably working for somebody else's schedule better or something like that. It was just very oversaturated. Yeah. And especially to your point of the frequency of events, digital events, virtual events. I know at my last, company in the time before COVID, I think like every couple of months we did a webinar. And we're just like, yeah, it's, we called it a digital event. We didn't call it a webinar because we're like, everybody's calling it a webier. We're doing a digital
nobody
event.
Has webinars, but that's kind of what, a virtual event. It's just a virtual event on crack, basically.
It is. It's a digital event. And we're like, oh, come to our thing. And it would be every couple of months. And we would have maybe like 90 to 100 registrants. And, yep. There's only a certain percent of people that are actually going to show up. But we'd be like, great, this is fantastic. And then once, a pandemic came in and then it became, okay, all right, we got to start doing these webinars monthly basis. And, I think we had one really great, I think it was an SEO related topic. And our SEO guy at that company was really well known in his space. So the minute he put out a registration link, like all his followers were like, oh my God, I'm going to sign up to hear Mark talk. And then that was like the highest, registration numbers we got. And then it just petered off from there, where it was like your usual like 50, 60, which is not bad. But then all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, I had one really good one, I guess. And I would keep saying it's just because there's an oversaturation out there. There's so many other things going on. And I've seen a lot of people also do that, like not another webinar or not another discussion about, making that their title to sort of poke fun at the fact that like, we're aware, you've probably heard this floating around a lot. We're also talking about it. Come join.
We're doing another one. Well, and that's what clients always ask me. Okay, I'm going to plan this event. I've never planned one before. I want 3,000 registrants. What percent's going to show up? And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
There's way more that has to do with that. I'm like, it could range from 35%, which is not great, to 85%, which is wonderful. So we have to dig into, how are you building your community? How have you been nurturing them since your last event? Because if you haven't, then that's not great. And then with the even when people are registering, are you requiring that the registration email is not a Gmail? Is it a business email? Are you recruiting people that are just customers and just prospects? Like, there's so many questions that you need to be asking instead of just like, I want to have 3,000 people, or like 50% going to show up. And so then that's where I recommend doing just way more asking questions of your team. Like, what exactly are our goals? Who are going to get there? Who do we want there? Would be super helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So also, I had asked you for your help and advice on a hybrid event that we were thinking about doing. And you showed me a really great, I forget what you called it, but you showed me a really great like tracking sheet.
Oh, yeah.
And what did you call it again?
Okay, so I'm huge on spreadsheets. If anybody on here knows me, I'm huge on spreadsheets. So with any new client, I always do 2 planning sessions. The first is called a KPI planning session, your key performance indicators, which just is a fancy way of saying, what are your goals? Let's get them documented, get your leaders and your planners all on the same page. Then we do what's called a beautiful minds. And that's where we bring all the minds, yes, together within an organization that are really the key stakeholders. We outline the very high level milestones. And through that, we kind of figure out what you care about, what you don't care about, where we should be spending our time, and making sure that we also fully understand the landscape of, is your team going on a offsite? Do you mostly go on vacations like on this time? So we can figure out too, like, how can we pace your work so you're not drowning at the end and your team is healthy? Because that's something I'm very huge on, is making sure that the team is healthy along the way, because events are stressful, right?
Yes, for sure. I love, love, love the fact that you call it beautiful minds, and it's just like bringing everyone together and just being like, okay, let's do this the organized and correct way, because that is the main, I think, component of planning an event, is just being organized and then also communicating efficiently with the rest of your teammates and team members, anybody who needs to know what they need to know. That communication needs to be perfect because nothing is ever really perfect, but if you're striving for perfection, it's still going to be pretty damn good, is how I see it. And so I always used to, early on in my career, when I had decided that like, okay, like the events track is for me and this and that, I would always say like, hey, even if there's nothing in events, like my skills are transferable. Like I have open communication, I'm really organized, spreadsheets. Well, this is how we're staying organized, we're staying on top of things. I'm good at multitasking, there's deadlines, there's a bunch of things to take care of. So I remember that being like the gospel that I would spread when I was first trying to like make my way in this career path of events, and what that meant and how I could prove sort of my worth and where my skills lie and how important they are. So absolutely, I love that's the best place to sort of start when trying to put on any event, hybrid, virtual, it doesn't matter. Figure out your KPIs and just start getting as super organized as you can from the beginning, because it's only going to help you out in the long run.
Well, and it's buy-in too, right? It's buy-in.
Right.
So one mistake that I made when I was not even that long ago, because I was internal, was, I had 9 managers in 5 years at a startup, which if you're from a startup, that's pretty common. And so I constantly had to like learn these new VPs of how they like to do things, and then they'd want to bring their people in. And so there's, one thing that the CEO of that organization, he's amazing, great human. He said, Lisa, one thing you need to constantly work on is buy-in, getting your stakeholders buy-in. And so that is stuck in my mind. I'll never forget that conversation. He's a very wise guy. Get your stakeholders buy-in before you do any event. Get them in a room, get it documented, hear from them, get their feedback. That's why the KPIs first. Do your goal setting and then bring the minds together. And then it helps bring everybody along during the planning process. For sure. So highly recommend. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go into your advice for people who are trying to put on an event, hybrid or not. I know we're trying to talk about making hybrid happen, but at this rate, I feel like I want to be inclusive to all the events, whether it's hybrid, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person. What's your advice to people putting on, maybe we'll actually focus more on in-person and hybrid models in 2021 versus 2022. So like people who are trying to like rally and get stuff in under the wire for this year. And then people are like, all right, we're going to do this in 2022. Let's take our time with it. What's your advice to those people?
Well, I'm a go-getter. So if somebody is like, I have this thing and we want to do it, I say go for it. 100% go for it. However, I'm also very pragmatic, and I also very much care about my people and my teams. So yes, go for it. However, the recipe for success needs to look different. And those KPI planning sessions will help create that recipe to ensure you don't kill your team and you're also being successful. So I'm all about challenges. I love it. Let's do it. Let's bring in new leads. Let's close sales. Let's do it. Let's do this. But your team has to back you up, and everybody needs to be on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a one time that we had back-to-back events, and they were in person. They were big trade shows, conference, whole thing. And yeah, guess what? I got sick from it. And I was sick for like 3-4 weeks afterwards. So it was like 2 weeks back-to-back, all that traveling, obviously it was before COVID, but still with that, like all the shaking hands, talking to people, all that other stuff. And both my colleague and I, who were doing both of the events and traveling and doing all, we both got sick. So then that was a real tough thing to deal with. That I'd be like, no, you go like sleep, because like you look like you're dying at this booth. And I don't, because I was like, I don't want to be left alone. I was like, if it's better for you to go like nap for 3 hours, please go nap for 3 hours and then come back, because I know she would. And then the funny but not so funny part is that like that day that she was dying the most, she sort of slept it off the rest of the day. Like after we finished working, she slept off for the rest of the day. Ironically enough, the next day I woke up feeling sick. And she was like, I'm feeling better, so it's your turn to like sleep it off a little bit and come down when you feel ready and all this other stuff. But yeah, things can get super exhausting. So definitely, I'm all for rallying as well. I'm not a morning person, but it's like 6 a.m. wake up time, fine. 6 a.m. wake up time, let's do it. Let's get together. We got to be down there by 7:30, coffee in hand, running around trying to do the things to start at 8, whatever it is. And that can be really tiring. So it is very important. And I, again, fully support that. Take care of your people. Make sure that they're okay.
Your people, especially your event planners, because not all of us, but we usually have a smile on our face, and we're usually like, okay, let's do this. We come in on a mission every single day to basically, and that's how.
Absolutely, because if events are pretty much all about optics, right? How does it look to everyone else? That's usually our biggest concerns. It's like, okay, things might be on fire, but as long as it's behind the curtain and no one can see it, it's about what everybody else can see out in the front. You want to see my smiling face. You want me to be really like approachable and accommodate everything that you're asking for as politely as possible, even though I might want to curse you off in my head or tell you how you're very, very wrong. But that's the optics. Everyone, you want to put that best foot forward. Everything has to be really good up front, but that does not mean that things are not going well in the back and everyone's stressing and again, anything that can go wrong will. So there's always some element of that as well, whether it's virtual, in person, and now hybrid. You never know.
It's our job to keep that pulse, right? So our job is to keep the pulse of calmness. So I do know I had a client say like, are you ever going to freak out? And I'm like, not really.
Not in front of you.
No, I mean, I really don't. I try to keep very calm. One client was either like, I need you to start freaking out. And I'm like, I'm freaking out like I am.
What's that gonna do?
But I've been doing this for 21 years. So I know exactly what your options are. I know exactly how to fix it. And I know exactly what we're going to do. So you can freak out and I will support you in those efforts. But I'm going to stay here and just focus on getting this fixed and done. But one thing I didn't mention before, if you're going to plan an event with COVID and the variants coming, always have a backup plan. And I think that's the key that we have learned over this year is even in an in-person event period, if you're just planning in person, always have a backup plan. And even if that backup plan is we purposely are not going to be moving to virtual if this in-person doesn't work, we're purposely not going to do that. Document it, make sure your team knows, make sure you know exactly what you're going to do if certain things don't happen, because then if something does happen, your team's not going to come to you in that frantic mode. It's going to be like, oh, we already discussed this. Speaker doesn't show up. We have a plan. We're going to put up a slide that says, enjoy the sessions on track 1 and track 3. Track 2 isn't going to be running for this session. So have a backup plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So actually yesterday I did attend an in-person event, and it was just a small thing, and it was talking about the return to in-person. And one of the things that both the speakers talked about was the fact that 48 hours ago, and maybe at this point 72 hours ago, everything was going to be fine and seemed on track to be like, great, where you can probably make this return. Now all of a sudden people are canceling because Delta variant, this and that, and it's like like LA mask mandate again, and all these other various things are starting to come up again. Sort of not so great news. It's rearing its ugly head again. Yeah. So now people are starting to back and be like, oh, well, maybe we jumped too soon. We didn't wait long enough to see what's happening. So people are starting to backtrack and say like, actually, maybe we'll do something a little bit more in person later. Or I know people have talked about doing micro events in the past, or at least it was something that I used to propose. And my last job, once that pandemic did hit, was kind of like, maybe you want to do a micro event. If you know what your state, county, country, whatever it is, what those requirements are in terms of getting the number of people together, social distancing, masks, all that other good stuff. Okay, so have that event of 20 people in a open air venue, or even if it's in a closed air venue, but it's like, have a button or a bracelet that tells people, color coding, like, hey, we can shake hands, or I would rather not. If I'm wearing a red band, it means a fist bump is fine. If I'm wearing a green band, it means I'm willing to shake your hand, or whatever, those types of things, and doing them in small areas, and then maybe having like one streaming session that's going to all those little areas, so that this way everyone is safe and you can still feel like you had an event, and all those other things, because we are still in a pandemic, and it's not helpful to try to push that envelope too far, because then you don't want to risk other people getting sick. You don't want it to be from your event. You don't want your planners to get sick, because then if they get sick and they can't be there, or what, there's a lot of moving pieces to all these things. So yeah, very much. And I'm glad you remembered to bring it up, because I did want to bring it up and I totally forgot about the whole thing that, like, things are probably bound to start changing again. Mm-hmm. So having backup options, your plan B, your plan C, your plan D, even saying that, okay, if this doesn't happen, these are our backup plans, and we want to make sure that those work. And that again relates almost, I think, back to budget and your team, saying that, like, don't skimp out on that. It'll be helpful to have as much help as possible to have that communication flow also, just be successful in terms of communicating, making sure questions are answered to either various clients or attendees, anything like that, making sure that the line of communication is open and clear. I'm going to ask a final question. What changes do you see in the events industry coming for 2022, 2023, and beyond? What do you see sort of on the horizon out there?
Well, our industry is used to change, right? Like, we are used to chaos. We're used to things moving very fast paced. We're used to managing many different things and wearing many different hats at the same time. However, before COVID, there was also this layer of comfort. So in between the chaos, we kind of knew exactly what the chaos was going to be and when the chaos would end. And we had this sort of like circadian rhythm sort of that we knew we could somewhat anticipate. And if we had a bullet come through our head, we could anticipate every once in a while we're going to get a bullet and we're going to have to dive. Yeah. With COVID and all of the changes, the world has changed now. People have left the workforce. A lot of women have left the workforce and they may or may not come back. A lot of people are working from home. They may or may not go back into the office. People are doing hybrid events, in-person events, virtual events. There's all sorts of stuff that are going on. If you want to do an in-person event, are you even going to get space? We don't know. You can actually join me. I'm doing a webinar with Hilton Hotels next week on Wednesday at 11 o'clock Pacific. So if you go to my LinkedIn, you can find the link. But we're going to meet with a bunch of people that have over 124 years of experience in events, from the production side, the trade show expo side, the Hilton side, nonprofit, healthcare, education, high tech. I'm on the agency side. So we as a team collectively, in every single kind of vertical within events, we can talk about what do we think is going to happen and how can we be there and support each other. But I really think that level of comfort and predictability, even in an unpredictable industry, is what we're not going to see in 2022 and 2023. So my recommendation is, when you get your comfort break time, own it. Do your meditation, do your yoga, spend time with your family, because you never know what's going to come next, and just continue learning, kicking butt, taking each day and owning it, because I have a feeling there's going to be a continual change and a huge learning opportunity in the next 2 years.
Yeah, for sure. That's another thing that I've heard about, that saying that, the events industry has been so stationary and so stagnant for so long, saying that this is the model that we have, and this is what we do, and this is the type of conference, and this type of trade show, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden everything got turned, and it was kind of necessary for the events industry to be like, oh, okay, we need to learn some new ways to handle things and provide different type of solutions. So why let go of all this learning that we've done? Let's not get rid of virtual events and the production value of that, and how making them look really nice and flow really well, because we just went through all this trouble about learning it. Nobody wants to just be like, okay, I just have all this knowledge and we used it for maybe like a year tops 2, and then sort of threw it away and be like, we're back to in-person, so we don't need it. Like, no, we should really be holding on to that model. We should really be making it work and making it look good as well. It's, we bothered to do all this.
I hope if you're doing in-person and you're just doing in-person, that the recipe that you are creating is different. I really want you to think about it. I really want, if it's in-person, I want your in-person events to be different. And if it's just virtual, I want your virtual events to continue to thrive and continue to be different. What I don't want, which I think our industry did get, is stagnant a little bit. This was the recipe for success. But the other cool part is people realized when there was layoffs, a lot of event planners got laid off, right? Because events were gone. But then now events are booming and people realize, oh my gosh, how did I survive with all these people? I need these people back.
Exactly. That's another thing that they talked about at the in-person event yesterday that I attended, that was like, the price of event planners and having event people has gone up. Like they're asking for more money because there's also such a high value. And so people are starting to realize, when I know I got passed up for a few jobs because they were like, oh, we're good. I think we're going to try to figure it out on our own. But thank you so much. If anything changed. And now they're like, oh, we don't just need one person. We need like 3 people to try to help us, or like some marketer or some other person on some other team has to all of a sudden drop what they're doing to be like, now I got to help out with this event, as opposed to just hiring someone who knows their events and knows what they're talking about, or knows what they're dealing with. There is, I guess, sort of a question from Brent. I see it in the chat as opposed to the Q&A, so I want to pull it up, or at least convey it. So regarding audiences, keeping your tribe or building it depends on being the loudest amongst all the noise out there. Does Lisa have commentary regarding the noise out there? Lisa?
Yeah.
And if anybody else has a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. And we've got about less than 10 minutes to try to answer those.
Yeah, and also just say hi because I'm just curious to see who's on there. I know Zena and Kimber, and I think I've met you, Brett, and Tracy and Carolina, and I know Amanda was on here. So there's a lot of people on here. So we'd love to, there's Tanessa. We'd love to hear from you guys and hey, Ricky, get your feedback. So here's my take. And when I meet with clients, this is what I ask in their KPI planning is, what really represents who you are? Are you loud? Are you smart? Are you buttoned up? Are you silly? Are you like a warm, cozy hug? What are you? What makes you who you are? Like my brand, whatever your personal brand, like I'm pretty sunshine and rainbows, which is not for everyone. I can definitely be more serious, but I'm generally happy and generally like that's my brand, right? I like to help people. But figure out what your brand is. I don't necessarily think you have to be loud to be heard. My recommendation is that you provide value. If you provide value, it's just like sales, right? There's two key parts of sales: asking for the sale and providing value to your customer. And thanking your customers and thanking your audience. So for example, like Goldcast, Yana from HashiCorp introduced me to you guys, and I've used your platform now many times for many different events. But one thing that I think a lot of people through COVID recognized was appreciation matters, right? Appreciation matters. Taking the time at the little moments matters. So being loud is great, but don't underestimate the value of adding value and appreciating and giving back. I think those are the things we kind of learned through COVID. So when I did my first event with you guys and I got done, I mean, I'm a vendor technically. So people hire me, I'm a vendor. You're my vendor, but really you're on my team in a way too. So I think of you as like, well, you're just on my team. You guys sent me so much appreciation afterwards. I was blown away. And it wasn't appreciation just like some random swag. It was thoughtful. And I won't forget that. And so I think when you're building those relationships and you're building events and you're doing all this stuff in COVID and through COVID, what I really want people to take with them is that layer of providing value and being thankful and showing appreciation. And I think that's where people are going to stand out. And when I'm working with companies and I see their registration numbers, because I see a lot of registration numbers, I'm in part of a lot of marketing. And I can tell you whose marketing works really well and why, and whose teams stumble because they lack some of that. So I think you can make a lot of splash in doing a lot of things. And I think being silly now is kind of fun because people need light, right? There's been darkness.
Absolutely.
In a very serious year.
I'm like, this is my moment. I'm a chatty Cathy, and I will keep talking, and I'll drone on, and I'll throw in jokes.
But let's shine some light, right? Like, let's be, I always sit down with people, and I have this template, and some people are like, we're not going to do a give back component. That's not for us. I'm like, that's fine. But however, think about it. At this time, there's so many people that are in need. And so like that could really elevate. I redid a sponsorship program. I'm doing sponsorship sales. And one of theirs is like a diversity and equity program. And they were doing all this side work for driving that effort. And I was like, why don't we wrap it into every single sponsorship package so that your 30 sponsors are now driving equity and inclusion? Mm-hmm. So figure out what matters to you and then figure out a new recipe. Like I'm big on cookies and dessert. And I was thinking, I was driving the other day and I was like, this is like an opportunity to build the best dessert that you can and put all the wonderful ingredients like flour and eggs and sugar can make muffins. It can make cookies. It can make all sorts of different things. We are now in the middle of making this new, delicious, amazing dessert. So let's figure out as a community what that looks like. And it's a different recipe slightly for everybody, but talking about the ingredients is half the battle.
Yeah, for sure. Well, on that sweet note, Thank you so much, Lisa. I haven't seen any other questions come in, but we have taken up a good chunk of time. Just you and I discussing, like I said, we could talk forever about this. We have before, and then been like, oh my God, this was supposed to be a 30-minute thing, and then turns out we were talking for an hour. So yeah, I invite everyone to, I was going to say that we will send out the link to your event that's taking place next week in our recap email from this. And if anybody wants to check out the booths tab, there are a couple of booths in there. There are a couple of our previous events, one with Drift, who did their virtual summit with us. Some of our Q2 events are on there, and then a booth just about Goldcast. So if you click through the Goldcast booth, you'll see why people chose us. And it'll also, if you just click, I think, on the icon itself, it'll take you to our website where you can get more questions answered. Christy, I see you were asking about pricing. So if you go ahead and go to the booths tab, you go ahead and click on Goldcast and click around. It should take you to our website, and you will be able to request a demo and do all that stuff. Christy, you can go ahead and message me at events@goldcast.io, and we will follow up with you regarding pricing and all that other good stuff. If anybody else doesn't have any other questions, I'm going to let everyone go with about 2.5 minutes to spare. Thank you, Lisa, so much again for your time and your wisdom and your energy. We loved it. And I want to wish everybody else a wonderful rest of their day and week.